What's up YouTube, Capital G here, talking about my homegirl Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries in this video and asking the question, could this card actually be good enough to warrant main deck consideration in this format? So I've actually been thinking about this for the past couple of days, and I got this idea from a regional top 8 Altergeist build where the guy was running Winter Cherries in the main deck alongside of Ash Blossom, and I found it to be pretty interesting. And then I kind of looked at things in the context of moving forward to this new format that starts today, and I was like, you know what, not only do I think that Winter Cherries is pretty good, I kind of feel like maybe he was on to something, because I think that she's actually going to get better with the release of Dark Sabers. And yeah, I kind of feel like in certain matchups, well, excuse me, let me rephrase that, in certain decks she can definitely be main deck worthy. Altergeist obviously is one of those decks. So let me first compare Winter Cherries right now and Winter Cherries last format. Right now, even though that event took place under last format, let me tell you why I don't necessarily think that Winter Cherries was a card that we really saw a lot of last format, specifically in the main deck. You guys know when Spiral was basically tier 0 and it was Spiral versus the world, we actually saw a lot of Winter Cherries. Hell, there were some people who were running Spiral who were even playing Winter Cherries in the main deck because they were just like, yo, if I can beat Spiral, that's the only thing that matters. Like beating Trickstar and some of the other decks, like I don't need to beat those. Like those decks need to beat me. I'll inherently beat them because my engine is just better. Well, when you look at how the format progressed, you know, once the Spiral Resort ended up getting hit, you basically were left with like True Draco and Pendulum Magicians being the dominant deck. We saw True Draco end up taking a YCS, and then its popularity obviously skyrocketed. It did well at YCS Atlanta, although Pendulum Magicians obviously won the event. And I would say that those were the dominant decks. And when you really can't play Winter Cherries against, you know, maybe half of the meta, or if you have 1 and 2 or 1A, 1B, Pendulum Magicians and True Draco, when you basically are saying that you can't play Winter Cherries against the first or second best deck of the format, I'm not sure if you can really say that it warrants main deck consideration at that point. We know that Winter Cherries is literally unplayable against True Draco because a lot of the builds with Monarchs Erupt, like they don't even run an extra deck. So obviously the card's not going to do any good there. And I think that a lot of people were just looking at Ghost Ogre and they were like, well, you're obviously really good against Pens because you can hit the Electromite, you can hit any of the scales, and you're good against Dracos because you can hit the diagram, you can hit any of their spells when they activate. So, you know, I think people just kind of went that route, right? But I think that things are going to change. For starters, if you look at this format, and really, I guess you can kind of wrap Flames of Destruction in this format in one boat because, you know, Flames of Destruction did just recently come out a couple of weeks ago. We obviously have the Nightmare that just got released, and that means new players basically in our meta. We have the Goki Nightmare deck, and we've got Spiral Nightmare, and honestly, I think that the meta is just drastically going to change. So my personal opinion, this is just my personal opinion, I believe that the top 4 decks in no specific order are going to be Goki Nightmare, Spiral Nightmare, Altergeist, and the Brandish Maidens. I know that I am super high on Brandish Maidens. A lot of people seem to think that they are not that good or that they are just an engine. Man, I'm telling you, I have played that deck multiple times. It is ridiculously good, and if you are not playing Darkest Diablos in that deck, you are seriously fucking up. But when you look at those decks, really only one of them is not predicated on an extra deck monster, or really the extra deck in general. That's obviously Altergeist, right? Speaking as somebody who's played Altergeist since October, since way before Multi-Faker was even announced, Altergeist really, like 90% of the duels, you only summon like 2 cards, right? You'll use Link Karibo, you'll use Altergeist Hexy. Ask anyone who has played Altergeist for a long time, ask anyone who has ended up, you know, playing it at an event, they'll be like, yeah, I only really use these 2 cards for the most part. Yeah, you may summon Ningirsu every once in a while, Borlo Dragon every once in a while, especially if you're not running Scapegoat. Like, you're barely going to use your extra deck at all with Altergeist. So Altergeist, they really, you know, the card's not going to be all that good against them. But if you look at the other matchups, right, for instance, we know because of history that Winter Cherries can be absolutely devastating against Spirals. I believe that even the YCS Sydney, the one that happened in Australia, I mean, the finals of that, which was a Spiral Mirror match, I mean, both players were basically too scared to even make a play because Winter Cherries was so prevalent at that event. It happened where, you know, one of the guys finally worked up enough courage. He ended up normal summoning a monster. His opponent flipped over Winter Cherries or revealed it from his hand. He lost his double helix. Game basically was over. And even though the Nightmares, obviously, you know, they give Spirals a lot more plays that they didn't have before, make the deck a little less predictable, valuable than it was in the past. Double Helix is still the catalyst of the Spiral deck. It's still the card that supercharges their plays and makes the deck just go insanely plus. When you get the Master Plan on field, she's going to search, and then you end up linking with her, you get your Spiral Resort, you get your Spiral Sleeper, and then basically the game is over. I feel like still to this day, even though that, Spiral players have incorporated a whole bunch of cards to, be able to go second, and they play like evenly matched. I ended up getting evenly matched yesterday on my live stream, and when playing against Spirals, it was incredibly strong. And yeah, Spirals right now are a very good deck with Nightmares or without Nightmares, but I still feel like if you end up taking away that Double Helix, you kind of eliminate their ability to pop off, and the Nightmares become just an afterthought at that point. Like, maybe they summon them, maybe they don't. If you take away Double Helix, you're basically playing against Tough and Super Agent Control, which can be very legitimate. I think that Tough is one of their best monsters right now. Maybe Tough is the core and heart of the deck, but it becomes a deck that you can actually manage even without a tier 1 deck. If you happen to play against Gouki Nightmare, and this is actually theory, I need to go ahead and watch Phoenix Flare X's video where he talks about how you can essentially extra link off of you can extra link with the Gouki Nightmare deck just off of, I believe, the Predaplant Ortho Scorpio, and if you resolve that effect, you basically get an extra link. But we've seen right now that Goukis are not hype. Like, I remember thinking couple of months ago that Goukis were just kind of hype. When people on my live stream, they'd be like, oh, Cap G, Goukis are getting a couple of tops, and I was like, oh, come on, man, it's Goukis, it's all hype. But we've seen with the first ARG where they're playing new formats, and we've seen at the regional level where Goukis are getting countless top 8s. The Gouki deck is not, it's not fiction, you know what I mean? It's definitely a deck that can extra link. It's definitely a deck that can pop off. You have a searchable Monster Reborn, well, really a searchable double Monster Reborn. All the monsters float, and we're seeing Gouki, for the most part, every single one of their combos involves Isolde. Isolde is not only a card that they're going to go into early and often, but from what I've seen, every single time they extra link, like, Isolde is always in the picture. I kind of feel like if you take out Isolde, yeah, they still have the ability to make some pretty strong plays, but they're not going to be nearly as strong as before. I mean, yeah, maybe they can get a couple of those Nightmare monsters on the field, but will they be able to extra link you? Like, I kind of feel like they won't be able to, and that's where I feel like the difference is with something like Ghost Ogre and Ghost Cherry or Winter Cherries, right? If you have Ghost Ogre for the Isolde, they still get a search, they still get to add a card to their hand, and maybe they end up soul charging her back onto the field, then you have to deal with that. But if you just Winter Cherry it, then they never actually get to summon it, they never get that search. It's just eliminating the card completely, and then they're just having to rely on the Nightmare cards, because I don't really think that any Gouki Link monsters are going to beat you. We know that any of the Magician decks, right? I know I didn't talk about them as being part of the big four, but Pendulum Magicians are still a legitimate threat. Even though they did lose Astrograph Sorcerer, they're still out there, and I think especially if you're running like the Mythical Beast and you're running Jackal and other level 6s, like I know Zephyr can do this, you can make things like Naruto for extra negates, and obviously most of them are going to summon Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon. If you take out Electromite, we've seen this over and over again, whether you were playing against Pendulum Magicians last format or the Pendulum FTK, you take out Electromite, man, Pendulum decks struggle. They can only, at that point, make kind of just rudimentary plays. A lot of them might be like 1 Omega or, number 41. If they don't happen to have Harmonizing Magician, their plays are incredibly underwhelming if they don't get that off. And then the Brandish Maidens, right? This is one where I kind of feel like the Brandish Maidens, if they get their whole rotation of plays off, the deck is just kind of out of control. But I do think, and then people have said this in the past, if you can stop Kagari. Kagari is the fire one, the one that is essentially the warrior returning alive. She gets to get a Brandish spell in the grave, add it to your hand, you get to just immediately activate that card. Most of the time what they're going to do is they're going to use Startup Engine early in their play. They're going to activate that, they're going to get a search, they're going to draw, they're going to go for Kagari, they're going to pull that Startup Engine right out of their graveyard. They're going to activate it again, which at that point it's like a +2 because they get another draw, they get another search, and they're going to get whatever you have on the field or whatever they need to like fortify their board. And then during the end phase or before the end phase, they're going to swap into the blue one. The blue one's going to get them an additional search, and they have so much advantage at that point. What are you going to do? But if you can stop the Kagari, not only are they not getting that second search, they're not getting the second draw, which can be anything. That can be a hand trap. That can be, anything that you just don't want to deal with at that point. It can be like a Twin Twister if you thought that your card was going to stop them or something like that. So if you end up stopping them and you don't have the Kagari ever hit the field, yeah, they can go into the blue one and they get a search during the end phase. It's a +1, but think about it, right? The card that they get during the end phase, it's not like they can actually use it. It's the end phase, and they can't even, like set it on the field, so it can't really serve as a defensive or an offensive card at that point, they get to use it during their next turn. But with Yu-Gi-Oh being as fast as it is, like who knows if they even survive that next turn. It's really Kagari giving them that search for whatever they need to defend themselves during your turn, plus the extra draw. Like those are the cards that they're going to use to basically take their advantage and like spiral it out of control to where you're not going to be able to stop them. And I kind of feel like if you can take away all of those options for those decks, you're basically taking their power down maybe about 40, anywhere from like 40 to 50%, and it kind of brings those decks down to the normal level, the level of where like tier 2 decks can actually handle them, right? Of course, Winter Cherries isn't just good against those decks, but it's also good against the rogue matchups. If you happen to run into like ABC are going to have a hard ass fucking time if they're going to try and win a duel without ABC Buster Dragon. Anytime they summon any monster, you just activate Buster Dragon. It works even better against ABC because a lot of times they'll search for a piece and they commit like all these monsters to the board, or they may go into like Link monsters and then think that they're going to be able to summon Buster Dragon. Then they're kind of stuck with these like average Link monsters like a Deco Talker that really doesn't do anything. Invoked Merkaba, that's another matchup where you can actually I guess wait for them to activate the fusion spell. You can chain Winter Cherries, you take away their Merkaba, and then I believe they have to fuse into something else, you know what I mean? So they might have to fuse into like one of the worst invoke cards just because they don't have any choice. But I feel like Winter Cherries in general can just be pretty strong across the board. And when you look at some of the decks, right? Obviously, I've talked about how Altergeist really don't need much of their extra deck. So in Altergeist, you could easily swap out your ogres for copies of copies of Winter Cherries. But even in decks like Trickstars or Dinosaurs or Element Sabers, right? Look at Element Sabers and Dinosaurs. What do you really need in your extra deck? I mean, especially with Ancient Fairy Dragon banned for Element Sabers, that was like the only card that I really even went into. Maybe you go into Isolde a couple of times, but for the most part, Element Sabers like never really used their extra deck. And Dinosaurs, you only really are going to use maybe if you run Brilliant Fusion, that'll be like one card, but for the most part rank 4s are probably what you're using. Logia, Doka, stuff like that, maybe Tornado Dragon, number 41, Cowboy because of the rule changes. But you're going to have like 5-6 slots that of course you can open up for something like Cherries. Even a deck like Trickstar, correct me if I'm wrong, Trickstar experts, but really it's just Holly Angel, right? Like Holly Angel is the only theme Link monster that Trickstars really run. You're not using the new card from Flames, and then for the most part everything else is just like scapegoat fodder, right? So if you can take out maybe 4 spots, who says that you don't just go ahead and slide an Isolde in there? Maybe you slide Double Helix or Electromite, your Kagari in there, and then those matchups become much more winnable when you happen to go second, because you are going to lose some dice rolls. You're not going to always go first, and some of these decks like Goki and Spiral, if they get their pop off, like they extra link your ass right out of the game, and you know, get Spiral Sleeper and negations, and it's like, dude, how am I supposed to stop that? But if you can stop it by going second and hitting one card and making sure that it never actually is able to get on the board, I don't know, man, things kind of change. So you guys end up letting me know what you think in the comment section below. This is just some food for thought. I'm definitely going to be experimenting with Winter Cherries just because, as I said, in my deck, Altergeist, the hand traps are somewhat interchangeable, and our extra deck really isn't necessary. So thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.